Council meeting. This is our May 13th, 2021 budget workshop. And Cindy, could you take us through the remote access and Spanish language interpretation features that we have?
Certainly. I'm going to share my screen just one moment. All right, to participate in public comment by phone, you would dial 669-900-6833. At the prompt, you would enter the meeting ID, which is 899-4316-7450. You would hit pound, and then during public comment, when the mayor calls for public comment, you would hit *9 to speak. This morning's meeting will have live Spanish interpretation. To access interpretation, you will need to use the Zoom application from either your cell phone, tablet, or computer. Instructions on how to use the Zoom app are listed in English and Spanish on the agenda posted on the city's website. Once you join the meeting from the Zoom application, you will see a small globe at the bottom or top of the screen. Click on the globe and you will be able to access the live interpretation. Marcy and Claudia are interpreters this morning.
Thank you. And I have with me a small American flag. So if we could mute our microphones and follow with me for the pledge. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And if we could have the roll call, please.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Here.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Here.
Councilmember Hardy?
Here.
Paul?
Here.
Tito?
Here.
Very good. And now we'll move to our section adoption of the agenda. I'll ask the city clerk if there are any changes to today's agenda.
There are no changes, Mr. Mayor.
Very good. And then I'll ask for a motion on adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Councilmember Hall?
Yes.
Hardy?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
Councilmember Tito?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes. So now we have the public comments section. This being a special meeting under California law, public comments at special meetings are limited to subjects on the agenda item only. Therefore, public comment will take place during consideration of the item. Each person's comment shall be limited to 4 minutes. We'll now move into new business, and we will look at item 5.1. This is review of the 2021 City of St. Helena Community Budget Survey. And I'll pass this to our city manager to get us into this.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning, everyone. I want to say welcome to members of our City Council, our city staff, and members of our community. I do want to take an opportunity this morning to introduce you first to Angela Cotton, who's joining us today. She is our new Human Resources Manager. Welcome, Angela, and thanks for joining us this morning. Angela started this Monday, I believe, so we're happy to have her join us. And we have a little bit of crossover with Kathy, so that's great. I have some introductory comments before we jump into both of the agenda items. And I want to formally welcome everyone to our first budget workshop in preparation for the fiscal year 21-22 budget. Our focus today is the city's general fund, and our next budget workshop is going to be 2 weeks from today on May 27th. The focus of that workshop will be water and wastewater enterprise funds. We'll also include some follow-up on the general fund issues that result from today's conversation. Before we get started, I want to take an opportunity to thank our finance department staff for their work in preparing us for today's conversation. Our finance department is led by Finance Director April Mitz and Finance Manager Mandy Kellogg, both of whom have worked some extraordinary hours weekends, numerous evenings, including last night, I think burning the candle late to help us prepare for today. There's a tremendous amount of work that goes in behind the scenes. We did some early work in forecasting earlier this year, and going and working with our departments and forecasting, analyzing trends, dealing with some volatile revenues this past year. So it's been substantially more challenging because of the continuing volatility of the revenues. It's also been challenging because there's been a lot of work associated with the pandemic, financial work that's associated with the aftermath of the fires, and now a lot of work dealing with the phase 2 water emergency. And that includes work like supply calculations, water allocation analysis, questions from our community, launching the Water Advisory Board. There's a lot of work, and the list goes on. We're also currently down one customer service person in that department, and that has added additional challenges, particularly as we move into this phase 2. So we have some plans in place to have some temporary staff until the position is refilled. It's also important to acknowledge that this workshop comes on the heels of what most of our employees and our community would likely consider the most difficult and disruptive 12 months of our entire lives. The COVID pandemic has changed the way the city operates. Our country, our state, our community, our city staff, we've all experienced heartbreaking losses. Our revenues have experienced unprecedented steep declines due to mandated business closures and modifications. Last year's LNU fire, which was the 4th largest in California history, and the glass fire, the 9th most costly in California history, have further disrupted our lives and have resulted in additional work on behalf of the city. And in some cases, some follow-up on repairs and damage that occurred locally. It was also a year that included some social justice challenges, a contentious presidential election, unrest at the nation's capital, and now we're experiencing a difficult water emergency. So these are challenging times indeed. And I want to thank and recognize our city staff for their sacrifices over the past year. They've sacrificed financially, they've worked long, difficult hours, they've worked through these incredible challenges on behalf of our community. So thank you to our staff. The workshop today includes 2 agenda items. We're going to begin with a review of a community budget survey. I want to thank all the members of the community that participated in that. It's provided some very good information and feedback for our city council. Then we're going to transition into a discussion of the preliminary general fund analysis. The budget survey is going to be presented by Priya Nixon, our assistant to the city manager, and the budget will be presented by our finance director, April Mitz. Our collective focus today and over the next 6 weeks, because it will take a little time between now and the time we formally adopt the budget, is to build a responsible budget that aligns our available financial and staff resources with city council and community priorities. So with that, let me turn it over to Priya Nixon, who will jump into our community survey.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you for those comments, Mark. Mayor and members of the City Council, it's a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about the 2021 Community Budget Survey. And just to echo off of what Mark said, I'd like to thank you for your leadership in asking our community members some questions during this very difficult time. I think it was very helpful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and okay, I'm going to try my best to make it big, but okay. So can someone tell me, Jeff, do you see
Yes.
Can you? Okay, thank you, Mayor Ellsworth. Okay, great. So this is a 30-page document. I'm not going to go through all 30 pages, but I'm really excited to provide some background, to go over the executive summary, and then we're going to actually go into some of the questions. And so just a little bit of background for the folks who are listening in. The executive summary gives a little bit of history on why this survey was done. It came out of the March 4th, 2021 special city council meeting. And it contains 10 questions that include some optional demographic information. And the survey was, we utilized SurveyMonkey, and we had a Spanish version and an English version. And we also did offer paper copies as well. So that is just some background information. And what I've done in the executive summary is I've added just some general feedback and themes, but I thought it would actually be helpful to go in and look at each question. And at the end, I'm going to talk about, there were 2 open-ended questions. And so at the end, I will talk about those. So I'm going to try my best to make it a little bit bigger. The first question was really about asking everyone, how long have you lived in the city? And so you can see here that a majority of the respondents really have been longtime residents, 11 to 20 years, and then more than 20 years. And so you'll see that the green and the blue here for the length of time. So that's just a little bit of an indication of some of the folks and how long they've lived here. So I'm going to scroll down to the next question. So this question really speaks to the quality of life in St. Helena. And I'll just let you know that the green is excellent and the blue is good. So if you sort of take a step back, and so I think you should be able to see it, that a lot of the respondents did say that, in the main, quality of life was excellent and good. And so I'll just call out a few here. That St. Helena as a place to live did receive, I think, almost 90% of excellent and good. The overall quality in St. Helena as a place to visit, ranked pretty good as well. And then St. Helena as a place to raise children. So I think it's helpful to just take a look at some of the trends here. And I hope that looking at the green and the blue combined sort of shed some light on that. So I'm going to go to the next question here. So this is question 3. And so we asked to please rate the following characteristics as they relate to St. Helena as a whole. And so for this question, green is also excellent and blue is good. And so I'm going to sort of, I'll move my screen a little bit, but you can see that, some of the trends include the overall feeling of safety in St. Helena ranked very high if you look at the green and the blue combined, the overall image and reputation of St. Helena, the appearance of the city, opportunities to participate in social events and activities. And again, this question relates to rating the following characteristics as they relate to St. Helena as a whole. So in the main, these are, if you look at the blue and the green, you can see how the respondents ranked these characteristics. And so I'll go down just a little bit and you can see that there are some areas of opportunities here. So we see for housing affordability and housing availability as well, you can see how the respondents rated that. So I'm going to continue to scroll down. And again, this full report is accessible on the agenda. Okay, so let me get to question 4. I'm just going to pause for a moment because I think City Manager Prestwich, he did a great job talking about the impact that COVID has had on the city, especially related to revenues and loss of revenues, and how that has had an impact and potentially will have an impact on the service level. And so question 4 really looks at, based on COVID and these revenue losses, can you rate and tell us a little bit about how you think these services make the city better for you? And we asked a lot of questions, so I've divided it into 2 pages. And so for this, green is very important and blue is somewhat important. And so I'm going to go through each page. So you can see here that one of the very important responses was providing fire protection services as very important and somewhat important, preparing for natural disasters as well, maintaining a low crime rate. And then there was also a lot of feedback and responses important and somewhat important related to infrastructure, such as maintaining and keeping the parks clean, keeping the streets clean. So I'm going to go to, I'll just pause here so you can see the green and the blue and the trends. And then I'm going to go to the next portion of this. So this is question 4, continued. Again, some comments on services such as the library, providing recreation programs, again, maintaining and repairing public buildings. There are a lot of people took the time to respond to all of these. So we have some feedback on recreational trails. So that's question 4. And again, this is a long question. So I'm just going to scroll up again to the top here just to so we can all take a look at some of the responses that received a lot of very important. And so then I will scroll down again to the second part of this question. You can take a look at some of the trends here. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that we did ask for some optional demographic information. So right here, this shows who took the survey in terms of age. And I'd just like to add that as part of your youth initiative, we are launching, hopefully very soon, a specific survey so that we can hear from the youth, and then we'll ask some really helpful questions on that. So this is response on what is your age? And then we did ask for what best describes your race and ethnicity. And so for that, it's sort of split 80-20 for white or Caucasian and Hispanic or Latino. And then I will go down to the next question here, which asked, again, these were optional demographic questions, asked your total annual household income, and that's sort of split into thirds here. So these were the different different categories that we asked. And then for this one, question 10, which is to which gender identity do you most identify with? You can see here that there were a number of respondents that identified as female. So I think it's a little bit more than 60%. And then we had around a little bit more than 25% responded as male. And so what I want to do, I'm going to scroll up to the top because we did ask, you did want us to ask some open-ended questions. So we had 2 questions that asked, what are the 3 most important issues facing the community? And so the respondents, great participation in this. And so the top, what I was able to do is I looked through all of the responses and I created tags, which were basically, I inventoried the different themes. And so we had around 81 comments related to business related comments, and then water and housing also, and then fire preparedness. And this relates to most important issues facing the community, and then city budget. And so I put here what the other different tags were for that question. And you can go to Appendix A, which is at the end of the survey. And I have put all of the verbatim comments there. So the next open-ended question you can sort of think of as recommendations / community priorities, I guess is a way to put it, related to improve the quality of life in St. Helena. So housing, water, businesses, and paving. And I would encourage you again to look at the comments related to all of those different categories. And I would also just like to say a big thank you to Up Valley family. They really helped us get the word out at the COVID vaccine clinic, where they handed out paper copies in Spanish and English. So I just want to make sure that I say thank you for their assistance with that. So that is the presentation. I know it's a lot of information. It is 30 pages. I would really encourage all of you to take a look at the results and read the verbatim comments. And so with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and City Manager Prestwich, I don't know if you have anything you would like to add to this presentation?
Mark, I'm just gonna jump in for a second and see if any council members at this point have any comments or input on what Priya's just presented. And seeing none, I'll pass it back to you, Mark. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll now transition into a discussion of the budget, and we have our department directors present today in case you have specific questions about any of the various disciplines. And at this time, I'll turn it over to our Finance Director, April Mitz.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to have Cindy is going to be sharing her screen and progressing the slides for us. Perfect. Thank you very much. So as already stated, this is our budget workshop number 1. This is definitely a very high level overview of where our preliminary revenues versus expenditures have landed for the general fund, at least in this point in time. You'll see a common theme going through the presentation today. This is still a very, very fluid environment that we're in. With the COVID, with the economic recovery, with being just recently progressing over towards the latest tier, and with the economy reopening, it is a very fluid situation. And so what we are presenting with you tonight is by no means the final version. We really feel like we'll have a better handle on especially the estimated revenue side, probably towards the end of this month, early next month. So next slide, please. So we do have 3 objectives for the workshop today. So the first is the general fund budget update and forecast. So we'll kind of talk about the past, the present, and the future, because in finance, we work in 3 fiscal years at once, because that's apparently how we like to do things. Then we are also going to have a preliminary discussion of the draft budget, or the initial preliminary budget. And then at the very end, we do want to receive feedback from the City Council on the general fund revenue projections, the current expenditures, and then also if there's any other additional funding requests for us to be able to incorporate in the budget that align with the City Council goals. Next slide. So the past. So we're going to be talking very briefly about fiscal year 1920. This is when, we had our mid-year budget presentation in February of 2020. Everything was looking great and rosy. And then at the end of March, we got our first shelter-at-home orders due to the COVID-19 pandemic. When all was said and done, the actual revenue losses for just sales and TOT was $1.43 million in fiscal year 20. The actual expenditure savings that we were able to realize was $2.1 million. And the reason we were able to realize so much in expenditure savings is that as soon as we heard about the shelter-at-home orders, I believe they went into place on the 20th. We got word of it a couple days before then. We put immediate cost-saving measures into place. And because of those cost-saving measures, because of making sure that departments did not spend anything that they shouldn't, we froze any training at that point, any non-essential things, we completely froze. So we did have a net savings of $2.1 million by the time the books closed. What this did for the city, it did leave us in a very healthy net position, which was 50% net position at that point, which that really helped us in the budget strategy going into the next fiscal year. So next slide, please. So the present, so we are currently in fiscal year 2021. As you recall from last year in the development of the budget, we did have several budget reduction strategies, which included some particular labor strategies as well as dipping into general fund reserves of about $1.75 million at the adoption of the budget. And again, I'm very grateful that City Council has set a reserve policy for 30%. I was very grateful for everybody pitching in and saving in the expenditures for the year before, because it did allow us to be able to draw on those reserves and not financially harm the city. So currently, as we stand for this current fiscal year, our estimated revenue is $15.27 million, but this does include emergency relief that we're anticipating of $2.51 million, and that is specifically for the LNU fire and the glass fire. It is not guaranteed that we'll be reimbursed for all of that, but we are working very, very hard with those funding sources to make sure that we have all the proper documentation to make sure that we get as much reimbursement as possible. It does include federal stimulus funds, and so this is the recent funds that we are awarded of $1.15 million. It is broken up into two separate fiscal years, and so the $575,000 is what we are anticipating in this current fiscal year, and then the next $575,000 will be received no less than 1 year later. So we are anticipating it in next fiscal year revenues. It does include one-time ERAF, which is, we typically get some type of ERAF every year, but it is not guaranteed. So we always consider it one-time revenues. And the last, I believe it's 10 years, this has ranged anywhere from $72,000 to over $400,000. So because of how much it varies, we do not budget for that, and we do consider it one-time revenues. And then it does also include an SB2 planning grant that we received for $160,000. Our estimated expenses is $17.39 million, and that it does include $2.68 million in LNU and glass fire expenses. So as City Manager Presswich had talked about a little earlier, this has been one of the most difficult years, not only due to COVID, but also the varying emergencies, and $2.68 million was a lot of funds that we didn't expect to have to expend. And again, we are looking at getting some emergency relief, but that is still a fluid situation as we're still working with the funding agencies to be able to get the reimbursements. It also does include a sewer lateral loan program of $405,000. Again, that is a reimbursable, but it is something that City Council has offered to the downtown businesses in progressing forward with the streetscape program. And it also does include overall increased operating expenses of $576,000. And those were approved primarily during the mid-year budget review and also several other council appropriations along the way. If this is what we actually end up at with our estimated revenues and expenditures, we are looking at an overall net position for the general fund of approximately 29%. Council's targeted goal is 30% for net position. So next slide. Again, just a real quick recap of how we did our revenue forecasting for the current fiscal year that we're in. For sales and TOT, sales, TOT, which is transient occupancy tax or the taxes on hotels, as well as property tax, typically make up for about just shy of 90% of our total general fund revenues. So when we're going through this presentation, we really do focus on sales, TOT, and property taxes. Property taxes, we did not experience any revenue losses at all this year, and so that is something that we did not have to worry about doing conservative revenue forecasting. But what you can see in this slide is for sales and TOT, you'll see a slow ramp up for what we typically would collect during those quarters. So Q1 for sales, we anticipated we'd collect 30% of our fiscal year 19 numbers, ramping up to 45%, 54%, and 65%. TOT had a much slower at the beginning, but we expected a very robust ramp up in Q4. And so this is where we're still remaining a little conservative. Is TOT, we anticipated 10% at Q1, 20% Q2, 30% Q4, or I'm sorry, 40% Q3, and then 75% in Q4. During Q1 and portion of Q2, we actually barely exceeded on TOT, but we definitely exceeded our sales projections. However, with the second shelter-at-home orders that were enacted in December and lasted through about mid-February, our Q2 did actually perform lower than what we anticipated. And to date, for the Q4 revenues, we are anticipating about $252,000 per month for Q4. It's important to know that during Q1, 2, and 3, we had never hit that level. Although we are getting very positive feedback from our hotel community that business has been doing really, really well for them. However, we will not know their actual sales tax and for April until the end of May, very early June. So again, it's that very fluid environment that we're in. Next slide. So here's our updated sales tax and TOT, and this is again just the adopted versus the actual to date that we've actually collected. For sales tax, this is all the sales tax collected through February 2021. We will not receive the March 2021 numbers until probably another 2 weeks from now. It's typically at the end of May. There's about a 2-month lag time. TOT, this is actual collected through March of 2021. So here you can see our sales tax. The adopted is $2.5 million. We've actually received $2.7 million. So the difference is positive $227,000. And again, that does not include March, April, May, and June. We are feeling very good about our sales tax numbers, but this kind of gives you where we're at to date. TOT, this is the flip side of it, where our adopted budget was $1.2 million. Our actual to date is only $767,000. So the difference is we're still showing short about $500,000 in this particular area. Again, we're really getting good indication from our hotel community on what's been going on, but we really will need April and May data to further understand how TOT is going to be performing through the rest of the year and also allow us to make better projections for next fiscal year. Next slide. So this is another scenario that we had been working off of over the past couple of weeks. And again, myself, Mandy Kellogg, and our city manager, we've been a lot of late night calls, a lot of every day we're rerunning, recrunching the numbers. We are actually looking at where we might actually land by the end of the year is sales tax. We're estimating an additional approximately $1.7 million in collections. And what this is due to our updated revenues from Avenue, who provides our sales tax projections for us. We just got updated numbers from them approximately 2 weeks ago, so this takes that into consideration. TOT, we are still anticipating very cautious about $227,000 that we're not going to meet our target, but that does also leave our total difference of positive $1.5 million over what our adopted budget was, which depending on where they actually land, it could be anywhere between a 30 to 35% net position, which again is very positive. It meets the city council's goals, and we feel pretty good about these numbers. But again, until we get more and more data, because the story is still unfolding, the economy is still reopening, the stimulus funding that has gone out to both businesses, cities, as well as to residents. And we're still trying to understand the overall economic rebound of what COVID-19 and the COVID-19 recession. So the next slide, please.
And Director Mitz, what this also reveals is that PowerPoint simply doesn't have the functionality of Excel to add two numbers together. And so we have a larger number in column 2 as a sum. So despite our several rounds of review, we missed the summation of those two numbers. So if you went back one slide, that's really a $5 million+ number
And I'm seeing
at the bottom of the estimated column.
I saw a hand from Vice Mayor
The manager clarified my question. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's after a while, all the numbers kind of get blurry. So the next slide is talking about where we're at in the future. So these are, again, our very preliminary numbers that we've developed for fiscal year 21-22. As mentioned before, we are having a very difficult time for revenue forecasting. Like I said, we've outperformed in sales tax, underperformed in TOT so far. So it is a very fluid environment. What you see before you is by no means the final numbers, and we will actually keep updating those numbers as better and better information comes along. The expenses that are being presented are pretty much status quo with a few exceptions. So the first one is the restoration of salary and benefit concessions, and this is per the MOU. As everyone is aware, we are very grateful for, all of our employees did take some voluntary concessions, which included equating to a 5% reduction in salary, as well as suspension of non-essential training, deferred comp match suspension. So there's a lot of salary concessions. So the current budget that we're forecasting does restore all of those concessions. It also is restoration of 50% of the non-essential training budgets that were cut in the last fiscal year. Any department increases that were given to the finance department and the city manager, they were only considered if they provided rationale for why they wanted to have that additional increase, as well as how that tied to city council's goals. And then the last item is budget investments that tie specifically to the city council goals, because we do want to make sure that our budget does align with council's priorities. Next slide. And this is, even though we just did this last Tuesday, it is a recap of what our city council goals are. So the first goal, number one, is to improve and maintain safe and reliable city infrastructure with a commitment to environmental stewardship and public health. The second goal is to stabilize, maintain, and improve access to housing. The third goal is to enhance organizational performance and commit to full participation, ongoing communication, and regional collaboration. Goal number 4, we do have an asterisk on this based off of council's feedback at Tuesday's meeting. And again, I have to caveat, this is a draft working goal title still to be solidified by the city council, but is ensuring long-term economic sustainability while supporting St. Helena's charm and rural character. Number 5 is to support thriving families and enhance the safety, well-being, and healthy development of our youth. And number 6 is to support initiatives that respond and plan for climate change. So next slide. So this is currently we have built the budget document, the preliminary numbers, with these vacancies in mind. And it's not, again, nothing is set in stone on this. This is just something when we were developing the budget that we did keep these positions vacant. We do know that vacant positions do affect the service levels. However, at this time, to maintain some or all of these positions, it may be necessary to balance the final budget, again, depending on where the revenue projections land when we get more updated data. So the positions currently, how this budget has been built is the planner position, a police officer position. And again, we currently do have a planner. This was an additional authorized planning position. Police officer position, recreation supervisor, senior librarian, senior civil engineer, and then a maintenance worker. And this is the salary savings related to the general fund only. And some of these positions are considered partial year positions. There are certain positions that as we go into some of the goals that, we anticipated them being a July 1st start date. They might actually start a little bit later, which could affect some of these numbers. Next slide, please. So here is the preliminary numbers for the revenues and expenses. So our revenues, we're about $14.6 million. Our expenses was about $16 million. That left a preliminary funding gap of 1.3, almost $1.4 million. When we look at the labor reductions for the vacant positions, which is the slide right before this, keeping those positions open, it nets a savings of approximately $776,000. So below, you'll see the revised revenue and expenses. Keeps the revenues at 14.6, decreases the expenses to 15.3, which now leaves a funding gap, including those vacancies, at $719,000. So again, that you can see what leaving those positions vacant, what it could potentially do to what that funding gap is. Next slide. So here are some draft revenue assumptions. And again, really want to focus on the top three of these, the property tax, the sales tax, and TOT. The assumptions that we had made in forecasting the data is the property tax is a 4% increase, but it excludes the ERAF, which again is those one-time non-budgeted items. The net increase from the fiscal year 21 adopted budget is $354,000. Sales tax, again, this is provided by Avenue Insights and Analytics, and it is their conservative model, because what they present to us is a most likely conservative, less likely. And so we always kind of stick with the conservative model, which was an increase of $2.4 million from our adopted budget. TOT for Q1 through Q3, we did factor in 60% of fiscal year 19 actuals, which fiscal year 19 is the highest year that we've ever had TOT revenues. And in Q4, we did assume 70% of fiscal year 19 actuals, which leaves us an increase of $840,000. And this is in line with what other cities within Napa County are doing, cities and towns. I did survey them just to kind of see what their projections are, and this is pretty close to what they're doing as well. License and permits, it was a slight increase of $143,000, and this was based off of growth in building permit activity during this current fiscal year. Contributions from government, this is the second installment of the COVID relief funds. You only see $500,000 in here. So although the net increase was of $575,000, we did also receive some one-time revenues of $75,000 for COVID relief at the very beginning of fiscal year 21, which was included in the adoption budget, or the adoption of the budget. We do have holiday event modifications, particularly for the Jingle All the Way event. In talking with the chamber, there were certain aspects of Jingle event which did provide revenue to us. Some of those aspects are being modified, so it is an overall decrease in revenues of $12,000. And then the other negative line item you see here is operating transfers in, which were considered revenues in this current fiscal year. That what we did is we took general fund supported funds. They were funds that were not used, particularly for civic impact improvements, that were transferred back into the general fund to help us actually balance the budget. So that is a decrease in revenues. But overall, our total preliminary revenue increases, we're looking at approximately a $3.4 million increase over the adopted budget. I'm going to look to City Manager Prestwich to see if he has any additional comments in this area.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to also add a few more comments on the hotel tax. When we look at the FY 18-19 numbers, we received actual revenue of in excess of $3.2 million that year. So what we're currently projecting with this forecast at the moment is approximately $2.087 million. That, as Director Mitt said, it's similar to the numbers that we see in other cities. We've seen a couple of different methodologies that are distinct from ours. We also had the former Las Alcabas Hotel, the Alila Hotel, Alila Napa Valley Hotel, closed for the last 12 months. So some of the other methodologies that others are using wouldn't make sense for us. But it's important to know that the upside on the hotel tax is at least $1.2 million, because we've performed at north of $3.2 million in the past. And this forecast today estimates almost $2.1 million. So this story is still being told. The May actuals, the May 2020 actuals, in contrast to May 2019, is going to tell us a really important story. And we're looking forward to learning those numbers in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the additional comments on those. Next slide, please. So next, we are going to be looking at the cost drivers, or the overall net increases. And what we did is we put these from highest to the lowest. And then we've also marked whether it's discretionary spending or non-discretionary spending. We also noted what council goal it ties to. And then in the green box, we also tied it to the budget survey. So if there was anything that was related to this particular item in the budget survey, we noted that by a green box. And then the final column, we actually added the amount. It is important to note that this does not include all council goals initiatives, as some were already programmed in the fiscal year 21 budget and are rollover items. Items such as the Climate Action Plan update, the Nexus study for inclusionary and workforce housing, the housing element update, and design guidelines. So these are just a few. So these are just the things from that they were not included in the fiscal year 21 adopted budget, but they're now being included in the preliminary fiscal year 22 budget. So the first item is our Measure T MOE. So this is the maintenance of effort, and it's $379,000. So it is a commitment as part of receiving Measure T funds. We did just have another meeting yesterday with NVTA, and this number, again, it's a very fluid number. Parts of this number could actually go down because there are certain expenditures that we did receive clarification from NVTA on that can be utilized as part of the MOE, such as the annual street sweeper payment for the loan that we have on that. And so that will reduce this amount by approximately $60,000. As we tie staff, street staff specifically working on Measure T approved projects, we can actually charge their staff time as part of this Measure T MOE. So there's certain things that we are going to be able to get this number down, but preliminary, we wanted to show it in here. We do have the normal cost of step increases of $224,000. Napa Valley College lease, this is $216,000. Again, this assumes one full year starting July 1. As we continue with the Napa Valley College lease, the tenant improvements, this number may fluctuate, but the $216,000 is a good indication of what the annual lease payment is going to be. The PERS unfunded liability, this is over and above what our normal payment is, and this is continuing to pay it off in the 15-year clip, which is our council directive, which is $173,000 for the next fiscal year. The Assistant Public Works Director position of $125,000. And again, this is assuming a July 1 start date, and this is just the general fund portion. Health insurance increases of $101,000. This is still a very fluid number as well. We will get the final numbers from our insurance provider in June. Right now, we've programmed about $101,000. This could decrease by probably $20,000. The next is business recovery marketing. So this is our continued effort to work to get our businesses within St. Helena to recover from the COVID economic impacts, and that's $100,000 is what we've preliminary put in. Hire cadet to the full-time officer. We currently have a cadet that we are supporting that's in the academy. So this is the $87,000 is the difference for what we currently have, what we're currently paying for this cadet in the academy to them being hired on full-time with the city. Next slide.
April, I want to jump in just for a moment with a question on that, on the
perfect. You can go back to the other slide, Cindy.
The cadet to full-time officer, is this something that we can look at as becoming perhaps a policy so that we know that we always have a pipeline that we're working with? Are we doing this in a way that's programmatic or policy or a policy approach, or are we doing this as in a sense, a one-off at this point?
I'll jump in on this if that's okay. This is a one-off, and I think it depends on whether or not we have vacancies or not. So at the beginning of the current fiscal year, we had 2 vacancies in the police department. This cadet was hired mid-year in January, and with the knowledge that the full-time hire depended on their performance in the academy, future interviews with the city, and the ability to fund the position. So I think it depends on, we're a small department, so one-offs work for us. If we had a continued challenge with vacancies, that would be something that we could look at. And In the last couple of years, we haven't really had those vacancies or a difficult time recruiting, but it's a nice tool for cities to consider. And with this particular officer, this was a good person at the right time for us.
Great. Well, thank you. Just looking at this, is if it is a model that's being created so that we, as you say, a tool that we can use when necessary. So I just wanted to get a little clarification on that, because it seems like that may be a benefit in terms of knowing how to make sure that we always maintain our staffing levels in that department. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So to continue with the net increases for the cost drivers, we do have incremental increases for the fire department of $83,000, and this is due to us wanting to maintain Sunday coverage, and then also an increased cost for dispatch services. And so it's not just tied to personnel, but it's also tied to the dispatch contract. Attorney for general fund litigation of $75,000. Interpretation services of $60,000, restoration of 50% of the training budget. So for non-essential training is $29,000. We are still maintaining our essential training budgets for certifications. We did have that in the current budget, so this is just above what's in the current budget, and this is across all departments. Measure T Class 1 trails is $54,000, and again, that is a requirement of the MOE for Measure T funds. Downtown street lighting of $45,000, and this has to do with the holiday lights that are down Main Street. Diversity and inclusion of $45,000, and the nonprofit grant program of $32,500, and this is based off of the current nonprofit grant applications that we have received. So the total increase from the adopted fiscal year 21 budget is $1.8 million. Next slide, please. So the next slide is getting into the current unfunded items. So there are several items that are not included in our preliminary expenditures. The first is civic improvements and maintenance. So this does not include storm drain improvements. So that's kind of a big thing that we wanted to point out on this one. Part of the EMG report did say that the city should be maintaining about $500,000 in civic improvements and or maintenance. And then in addition to that $500,000, there's an additional $500,000 for storm drain improvements. So the budget does not include either of those items. We do know that the near-term financial challenge for the city is going to be helping deliver a portion of the cost of the Mills Lane storm drain project, which is only partially funded by developer costs. So it is something to take into consideration when we receive your feedback on developing the budget. It does not include an HMGP match for defensible space. I am very happy to say, as of 2 days ago, the city did receive notification that we may submit a full application for this grant. The city's match portion is $318,000. However, it can be broken up by segments. And I know both Mandy Kellogg is here and can speak more to the segments, as well as Chief Sorensen. It can be broken up into segments. So the full $318,000 match, if the full grant is received, it would not have to be all in fiscal year 22. It could be segmented into potentially going into fiscal year 23. It does not include any additional tenant improvements and relocation expenses. The current fiscal year budget, we did allocate $400,000 for that. We are anticipating those costs are going to be higher by about $250,000, so it does not include that. It does not include pre-funding sick leave, additional sick leave conversion liability. So far, we have pre-funded about $300,000 of this. Right now, this is probably one of the lower funding priorities for funding. The benefit has been turned off for all future city employees, and due to recent attrition, it is helping to reduce this actual liability. And then I do want to note for CARES funding, The current fiscal year budget does include $60,000 to help with the CARES funding. The CARES funding does allow for a discount of 50% for low-income qualified families of their base rates for water and wastewater. As of right now, we have noticed an increase in CARES applicants, so it does reduce the amount of applicants that we can take in. Right now, we have approximately room for one more, and what we have not included in the budget and what we would recommend is including approximately another $10,000, which would allow for us for about 10 more households. And I believe it looks like City Manager Prestwich might have a couple of comments that he'd like to make on this as well.
Thank you, Director Mitz. I just want to augment your comments on the HMGP match. This is a 25% match, so the grant is in excess of $900,000. So it's a very significant grant for defensible space, and that's all I wanted to add to. Thanks.
Are there any council questions at this point? Seeing no hands up, I'll hand it back. Oh, I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Yeah, maybe we'll get into down the road in this conversation some of the potential strategies that we're looking at to reduce relocation, tenant improvement expenses. Maybe this is not the time to do that, but at some point I'd like to have a conversation about that. And then back to maybe clarifying, it's a couple slides ago, but I think we all have it in mind. There was a mention of a $32,000 increase in the nonprofit grants. I just want to make sure that we understand that there was a significant increase in the requests made to the city, and so I don't want people to think that 32,000 is an increase in the request from the prior year. Could you clarify that, either April, Mandy, or Mark, to make sure that we're all on the same page with what that number means? Thank you.
Thank you. I would actually ask Mandy, because Mandy is heading up this nonprofit grant program. So thank you very much.
Yes, we did have a significant amount of requests this year. It was actually upwards of 400,000 in requests, and we generally only program about 190,000 in the nonprofit grant program. That 32,000 is actually an increase from fiscal year 21 to 22, because in 21, we funded a much lower amount due to our decline in revenues.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Ellsworth. I just wanted to go back briefly to the civic improvements maintenance item. Am I correct in understanding that if we add the storm drain improvements, then we have $1 million in unfunded items for that line item?
Yes, I can comment on that. Thank you, Councilmember Hardy. So with respect to the EMG report, which was associated with the condition of our buildings, that recommended in early 2018 a number that equated to about $460,000+ a year of investment to maintain existing building infrastructure. With the infrastructure financing task force report this past year, there's a notation in that report that refers to a comment from the former public works director that the city would recommend, the engineer would recommend an investment of approximately $500,000 a year in upgrades, maintenance to our storm drain assets. As you know, there is no funding mechanism other than the general fund today for investments in our storm drains. And so you're right, that's a cumulative $1 million if we consider both of those recommendations.
Thank you.
I'm seeing no other hands from council. So if our finance director would like to proceed.
Great. And just one other, I just want to say big kudos to Mandy Kellogg for all the work that she did do for the HMGP grant funds. On a side note, in addition to this one, we did also receive the notice that we can submit a full application for a very large water project as well. And I believe it's the Bell Canyon Intake Tower. So very happy about that. And I thought I'd do a side note since we just got word of that one. The next slide, which is actually our last slide today. So this is discussion and direction. And so what we would like to do right now is to receive feedback from the City Council on first our general fund revenue assumptions. And then to do that, we can go back to the revenue assumption slide. Also provide feedback on expense priorities. And then also if there's any other funding requests, anything that we might not have failed to mention today, or if there's something else that the council really does wish to incorporate in this budget that's, in conjunction with their goals. So with that, Cindy, if you can go back up to the slide on the revenue assumptions. Great, thank you. And seeking any feedback if there's any other assumptions that you feel are more pertinent. Again, it really is going to be dependent on the next 2 months' revenues.
Are we seeing any council comments or questions?
I see Councilmember Hall.
Oh, okay, very good. I see the Vice Mayor, and then I see Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I just wanted to get a little bit more clarification on the reimbursement for the fire and other expenses that we had. What is the timing on learning how much and when do we receive that notice? And then when would those revenues come to the reimbursement come back to the city?
I'm going to look to Mandy on this, Mandy Kellogg, because she's very, very familiar and very involved with this process.
I don't have a clear answer on the exact timing because it is somewhat of a back and forth process with FEMA. As far as the LNU fire, we've submitted all of our documentation to them. They reviewed it, submitted it to their higher authorities. It was approved, and then now they've come back to us with additional requests. So it does take time in that sense. We did receive all of our mutual aid reimbursements already from Napa County in regards to both the LNU fire and the glass fire. With the glass fire, we have about 3 of our projects have already been obligated, but until, like I said, I get final word that the check is on the way, they could still come back and ask additional questions. There's other projects that are still in progress just because they are construction projects such as like the Meadowood tanks. They won't obligate the funds until construction is complete. We have 18 months from the date that the fire was officially declared to complete those projects, which I believe puts us at April 16th of 2022. So it is unfortunately an ongoing process. Like I said, they have officially obligated some of the projects, but I don't know when we'll receive the funding. I'm hoping within the next 90 days.
Thank you.
And Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. My apologies, my computer is moving slow, or maybe it's my internet connection, so I was not able to raise my hand electronically. I just had a couple of questions, Dr. Mitz, on the first 3 items on this slide. First, I just wanted to comment that it's interesting to see our sales taxes, 70+% of our revenue contribution across the board. And that's with a downtown that is suffering greatly right now. I think our property tax estimate is probably a good solid number. It is what it is. The TOT on the hotels, as you've said, I think is going to bounce around quite a bit, but it's a very, very low contributor. It's only 15 to 20%, even if we're back to normal, whatever normal is. But I did have a couple of questions about Avenue and the methodology of the estimate here. If the sales tax in Avenue is based on prior sales tax contributions, and the methodology is to apply a sort of top-down percentage on those numbers, it doesn't sound like there's an accounting that's being made for the reduction in our tax base through business failures that have occurred over the last year. So before we got into COVID, we had about an 8% vacancy in our downtown. Today, it's probably 15 to 20%. So our our tax base has actually been reduced. And I just want to make sure that when we're thinking about applying a blanket percentage reduction of future numbers, our base is actually smaller today. Our ability to generate sales tax going forward is reduced because our base is smaller. So a 75% reduction on what used to be 100% is probably the equivalent of only a 60% today because our base is smaller today. So I just want to make sure as you're going through this, I know you said you've got a lot more work to do, that we're thinking about things like that. What is the ramp up period required to get our downtown back up on its feet? Business closures, vacant space take a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money to recover. They're not like necessarily a hotel where it was shut down, they stayed alive, and now they're open again. When a business disappears, a landlord has to find a new tenant. It can take years to do that. So I just want to be real clear, because this is the largest contributor to our revenue estimate, that number is a solid number, as much bottom up as we can get it instead of a top down. So that's my only comment there.
Director Mitz, it may be helpful for us to identify the property tax estimate in dollars right now, along with the sales tax and the hotel tax, the actual revenue projections. And either I could do that or you could do that.
Actually, Mandy will have that on her screen. And if I can make one quick comment regarding the sales tax, in working with Avenue, we do meet with them quarterly, and we do let them know when businesses are closing, and they do take that into their forecasting model. You know, and that, like I said, that is something that we do work with them. We also do get a report from them, and I will have to look it up. I don't know what the numbers are right now, where they distinguish sales taxes brought in by what they consider the downtown business core, which is the main area, versus overall sales tax for the city of St. Helena. I will have to get those percentages later to you, but that is something that they also do take into consideration, downtown core versus other businesses within the city.
Great, thank you, April.
And then, perfect. And then I will look to Mandy as she will have those numbers for the actual projections.
Yes, the projection for property tax is at 5.48 million. For sales tax, it's at 4.9 million. And for TOT, approximately 2.1 million. And those are the overall projections for next year.
Thank you. And I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Ellsworth. This is for Dr. Mitz. I just wanted clarification, because we had talked about this before, that where the majority of our sales tax, where is that coming from in general? Could you tell us the businesses?
Let me pull out my handy audited financials. I had to lead over to get those. So in the back of our audited financials, we do have the top 25 sales tax drivers. And I'm pulling it up right now. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe you can clarify. Is this in the audited financials, or if it's something that we received from Avenue?
I believe it's something we received from Avenue, but there is information in the back of the CAFR, but I don't know if it breaks it down in that detail. I think it's more just type of business in the CAFR. Sorry, audited financials.
Okay, so no, I did find it. So on page 124 of the recent audited financials, it does have the principal sales tax producers, and it's the top 25. But what it does it in alphabetical order, because sales tax is considered confidential information. The top 5 for fiscal year 2020 was top 5 in alphabetical order. So we have Abreu Vineyards, Central Valley Builder Supply, Charles Krug Winery, CIA, Farmstead. I'll keep going down since there's a big list of them. Goose and Gander, Gott's, Harlan Estate Winery, Harold Smith and Son, Harvest Table, Los Alcabas Market, Martin Design, Maryville Vineyards, Napa Valley Ag Supply, Napa Valley Petroleum, One True Vine, Safeway, Steve's Hardware, Sunshine, the Charter Oak Restaurant, Trevinier, Trapasti, Treasury Wine, and Sunwalt Ford. So those are our top 25 in alphabetical order, and that was at the end of fiscal year 20, and we have newer updated information. Typically, they're right around the same. They don't switch around too much unless we have a closure.
Okay, thank you. So that matches what I was thinking with the COVID expenses have been around our, home improvements, going to putting in new plants, hopefully drought tolerant ones, but whatever people did while they were home. Also, fortunately, it's good to hear people are buying from our businesses and our restaurants, I guess I should say our restaurants, even with takeout, wine, and also some of those trends are important because that's what I see reflected in this number. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council comments at this point? Okay, Director Mitz, if you would like to take us back in.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the feedback and the comments, and definitely something as we continue to fine tune our revenue numbers. So the next is the expenditure side. We'd love to get some general feedback on the expenditures on, if what we've included in here is aligning with the goals, if there's any other things that we did not include that you would be interested in us including in the more refined draft that we bring back later.
And we want to
Director
advance
Mitz,
to slide 1.
I want to just jump in with a comment quickly, knowing that we're moving into a spot with a new public works director coming in. And if we're looking at May, we're sort of in a holding pattern on the May TOT numbers. If we're looking at our infrastructure needs, our water needs, our fire preparedness needs, can we assess as we go forward with our new public works director where some of, if we're looking at a different level of funding coming in through May, I'm just saying this appears to still be in flux, and there may be an opportunity with the new public works director coming in to identify where we can shore things up on the water infrastructure and fire preparedness side. I just want to make a marker that perhaps we'll have an opportunity over the next month to identify where some funding could or should go.
Mayor, can you explain, you used the term make a marker, and I'm not sure I understand what you mean when you say that.
Well, what I want to do is just make the comment that if we don't have all the information just yet regarding how much we're going to be getting in May, and we identify through our public works department and our staff where some critical needs are, I just want to make sure that that's part of the conversation that shows up as we get past our water review, the review of the budget for the water and wastewater, making sure that we return to this conversation as we get the rest of the information. That's just my.
Okay.
And go ahead, Vice Mayor Doran.
Well, go ahead, Mark, finish the thought there. I had a couple comments on,
Okay.
I'd like to get a little bit more information about coverage on the police department and make sure, one of the issues top of mind for me is staff morale and potential burnout and sort of a self-defeating mechanism that comes into play. If we do not have the staff, then we create more issues. And so there's a conversation to be had there to make sure, the survey said public safety is top of most folks' mind, fire and police, and obviously water and wastewater. So that's the focus for any elected official in my mind. I just want to make sure that that we're not just glossing over that issue with respect to police department coverage.
Okay, could I'll ask the police chief to also comment on that. And before I do, the prior thought I had just with respect to the mayor's question about needs and public work needs, I also assumed that perhaps, Mayor, that you were discussing the larger context of our significant infrastructure needs, which really total tens of millions of dollars. And want to acknowledge that in our work plan, we anticipate a near-term report to the council that outlines all of those significant needs on really all, the general fund, the water fund, and the wastewater fund. And then I'd also like to comment on the police department briefly. Mayor, is that accurate that you were also thinking about the more significant long-term financial challenges associated with infrastructure?
Yeah, yes, and that conversation should be opening up as we move in with the new director, and so that I think that's accurate.
Okay, thank you. And then with respect to the police department, we started the year with 2 vacancies. The department does have a grant-funded school resource officer, which added an extra officer. We have a grant application in today. We will not, unfortunately, learn whether that grant application will be acted on until after we have to adopt next year's budget. And should that position not be filled, we have a couple of options. We can talk to the school district about some form of partnership to fund and continue sustaining the funding for that particular position, or that position can slot into the other vacancy that is currently open within the department. And as you learned earlier, and is shown at the bottom of this current slide, the current budget assumes the hiring of the funding of the position to hire the cadet to the full-time officer. And I would ask the chief to also address staffing and perhaps a brief overview of how we staff up and identify the gaps, particularly with the leadership gaps that occur from time to time.
Good morning, Mayor and City Council. Real briefly, went into this down 3 positions. The cadet that's currently in the academy is filling 1. The school resource officer grant, that would fund the 2nd position. Currently, the only reason we are down is because of that SRO grant, which takes the school resource officer off the street and puts her in the classroom. As we recover from COVID-19, it's that 3rd position we can take a look at, depending on the grant and the school's response should we not receive the grant, and maybe take a look at filling that last position at mid-year. As far as morale goes, yes, our officers have been working a lot, but that isn't just due to being, the vacancies that we have, but we've also had people out on extended periods of leave for maternity leave, which is rare that we have 2 officers at the same time having children. And those officers, 1 is back now, and that 2nd officer will be back in the middle of this month, next week. And that will certainly help improve morale here and help with the traffic. We receive a lot of traffic complaints. It'll also be able to provide more traffic safety out there during the day.
And
Thank you.
thank you. And Mr. Prestwich, as we move forward into the year, looking at funding, et cetera, the conversation with the police, making sure that they're feeling adequately staffed, that'll be an ongoing conversation as the chief said, in mid-year, perhaps knowing more. So just want to make sure that we keep that dialogue going so we know where we are in terms of making sure the police feel they've got what they need to provide the public safety. Councilmember Hall, and then I'll go back to Councilmember Chateau, but Councilmember Hall, I think you're raising your hand pertinent.
Thank you. I think we should keep in mind that this is probably not a conversation about business as usual. And by that, I mean, we're in a state of emergency financially. We were in bad shape before COVID. I think the comments about the infrastructure expense are absolutely critical. It's probably 75, 80, $100 million that's unfunded that we need to consider. And we need to consider about staffing across the board. So, Mr. Mayor, your comments about an ongoing conversation with the police force about staffing, I think is well put, well understood, but I think that same conversation should be happening across every single department, frankly. That's how I view it. Somehow, we need to look across the board. We need to get back to what are the key priorities and how do we get the most leverage we can around those priorities. The fire department, for instance, needs a lot of help too. So does administration. So does finance. So anyway, we just need to get to, this is more an exercise in my mind in sort of economic triage than it is how best to add incremental gains department by department.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Council Member Chateau, I saw your hand up a bit ago. Was there a comment or a question?
It was. I'm just trying to figure out and could use some guidance on the feedback you want to receive from us. Because when I see these numbers and I see, you know, there's amounts and they aren't in the budget, I want to make sure that I'm able to give helpful feedback, whatever you need in terms of what I want the focus to be on. At the beginning, you showed a number where we were going 1% below what we had set as a council goal as the reserves. And I am willing to do that because of this emergency situation. And there's so much here that I think is really important we fund, like the defensible space, that matching money, to me would be really critical that we get that grant and we find the money so that we can protect our community, knowing how big the expense is when these fires come through. The more that we can do to prepare and the more that we spend up front, the more we save long term. So I just need some guidance on what you want to receive from us.
I hope I can be helpful in this regard. And as Director Mitz begins to walk through these various expenses, it would be helpful for us to know areas where, you know, if we're looking at a line item here, for example, with the PERS unfunded liability, we've made the assumption internally that this is something that is essentially off the table for discussion because there's been a prior council commitment to accelerating the pay down of this liability. And so while it is discretionary, what we would expect to receive from you today is essentially some feedback that yes, continue to build that accelerated payment into the budget. And I think for us now, it would be helpful to know which are the items that are really off the table. And if there are other items that perhaps we don't have to make and we really don't need to make decisions today because it's premature on the revenue forecasting. So we don't know exactly how that is going to shake out. But if there are items that look like there's an opportunity for an adjustment that you're okay with, then that's helpful feedback for us. In a larger sense, and it's probably still a little premature, but when Councilmember Chateau references the reserve levels, I mean, I think we can bring you options at future meetings about here's what would happen if you dipped between, based on your funding priorities, here's what it would take or the impact associated with our fund balance, whether it leaves us at 35, 30, 25, whatever the number might be. But we're looking for just general feedback on, are we okay considering charging some costs like the street sweeper to our Measure T funds? Or would you like to see the entire dollars spent on projects? That's sort of the focus today.
Other council comments?
Mark, the table 9 in the report about where the defensible space dollars were listed. These are all items that are not included in the earlier numbers, correct? I mean, it's another $1 million, $1.5 million plus here that if you look at that list, they all look important, perhaps even more important than some of the items on the the original base list. So maybe that's where the conversation starts. Do we think the list on our expense total right now is correct? Or do we want to add another $1 million to it?
I think that's
I
a fair
agree.
question. And
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, I agree with Councilmember Shoto that defensible spaces, I think, is critical. It helps obviously everywhere across the board, and I think our town needs it as much as possible. To establish it, somehow we're going to have to get money in the door, and maybe that's where we do it, and more support to the fire department, frankly, to help identify where we need these defensible spaces. And it doesn't sound like we have a crew to help do it.
In terms of
So-
looking, go ahead.
Sorry, go
City Manager. Did you?
Sorry, go ahead, Mayor.
Did you refer back to the city manager? Was that a question for the city manager on the defensible space?
No, I think my question is just in general, the expenses not in the draft budget. They all look important to me. So if we want to go through this list, do we still want to not set aside money for civic improvements that are clearly needed? Are we not going to fund the TI work for the staff transfer over to the college? I think all of that has to be included along with defensible spaces. So that should be included in my book. Somehow it needs to get over there. So it really, it's almost a doubling of the existing expense. It's maybe, I shouldn't say a doubling, but maybe it's a 50% add to the number that we're currently looking at.
So in terms of increasing revenue, many different strategies, and that's, part of this upcoming conversation as we prioritize the input in terms of certainly what Mr. Councilmember Hall is putting forward as we move towards our budget decision making in June. Getting all that input in and those considerations, I think, is very important. So any council members who see where they think this should slot, please get that information to the city manager, to the finance director, so we can sort of work forward with that.
Could I comment briefly on the defensible space grant? This is a grant, just for everyone's awareness, that this would assist private property owners with clearing of their property. So it is one-time money. It is helpful to have the opportunity to find a grant that can help folks that otherwise might not initiate that work. And so that's the good news about that particular grant, but it's not a ongoing funding program. We would need to continue to seek grants of that sort that help support and provide essentially grant funds for 75% of those costs, if not more. And the city's match would allow the property owners to do it at no cost. Some programs like this, some HMGP programs like this, whether it was a home elevation program that another agency in the county used a couple decades ago, often the match is provided by the participating private property owner. In this case, the assumption is that the city would fund the match on this particular defensible space initiative.
And certainly with issues like defensible space, fire preparation, if we can accelerate in any way the conversation to move forward with that type of activity before we get deeper into the dry season, I think there's a value to looking at where we can accelerate on aspects like that. I'm going to go to Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you. I mean, I'm going to speak to a concept that I don't believe is reflected anywhere in this budget presentation, but it does relate directly to defensible space. I don't really see how we get to what I would call a sustainable position with respect to protection against the kinds of wildfires that we saw last season. I don't see how we get there until we have what I would call, a systemic fire prevention plan, something that is looking not at individual properties, but rather at the space of St. Helena as a whole. I think that's something that the presentation from Napa Firewise does address. I don't know that that answers all of the concerns we might have as a city, but the one thing I'm sure of is that focus on defensible space in terms of individual properties is in effect the status quo. That's how wildfire protection has been organized and implemented in the regulatory structure for decades. And my take on the last half dozen fire seasons, but especially the last fire season, is that lens for viewing what fire protection, fire prevention is about is entirely inadequate for the fires of our time.
One aspect that has been moving forward is the cross-jurisdictional dialogue that's so critical in looking at this, because we know that fire does not recognize jurisdictions. And so that communication between the county, the state, and our municipal fire department, as well as with Firewise Foundation, really moving forward. They went forward with their community wildfire protection plan and fuel mitigation, looking at that in the hills. So I think there's a more comprehensive look that's coming forward. Certainly everything needs to come forward as quickly as we can bring it. But I do think that that ongoing dialogue cross-jurisdictionally is part of what will help us get our feet set and be ready. And knowing, I do think that the discussion of fire prevention really needs to be tied in with our professionals, with our fire department, with CAL FIRE, who serves in the county. So we're going to have our meeting on the 19th at 6 p.m. Wednesday, the 19th. And perhaps that's where we can really focus on this conversation and see where things can come together.
Yeah, so what I'm talking about is, what are the concrete actions in terms of fuel load reduction that need to be funded? I mean, that's the dialogue is required to finalize a plan, and it certainly helps in understanding what's going to be possible in terms of funding, but we don't have the benefit in concrete terms of any of that dialogue till there's a funded plan.
Yeah, I completely concur with Councilmember Hardy. And all the more reason that we take a closer look at our fire department. It's a volunteer fire department. Our staff is tired, and they're full-time paid folks. The volunteers of the fire department are, like all the rest of us, trying to work hard at a job, trying to earn a living, and it's getting harder and harder to rely on those volunteers to, quote unquote, come to our rescue. So there's probably a very large additional unfunded liability there just in how we operate the fire department. In addition to Lester's comments, I think it's exactly right. While I'm thankful for broad county-wide conversations, all of that's very helpful, but we need to look at our city. What are we doing that's concrete? What actions can we take today? What's it going to cost? How do we get it funded? And how do we make room in our budget for these types of contingencies? So, if you look at the city of Calistoga, they've invested in 24-hour fire watch tools and techniques, current, latest, greatest stuff. It's not necessarily setting a target to reduce the volume in the forests, as Lester commented on, but at least they've taken some specific steps to guard, quote unquote, their territory, or at least provide other advance notice on fires that might threaten the city. And they do that with the 24-hour fire watch actually at Clover Flat landfill. This city could benefit from the similar type of technology, sort of tools, whatever our collective plan has to be. I think fire season is year-round today, and our budget isn't reflecting substantially movement in that direction. We all know it, we all feel it, we all say we need more protection. What's that mean in terms of investments on the ground in the city of St. Helena? We have to get there.
Thank you. Are there other council comments? Okay, Mr. Presswich.
Mayor, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Mitz to walk through our expenses briefly, one by one, or page by page maybe. And we won't overlook getting back to the current unfunded items and having a little more conversation on that front.
And certainly want to put out there as well that these ideas certainly regarding structuring of our emergency services, police, fire, et cetera, please, to the council, those comments are very valuable. So having those boiled down to be incorporated are important if you want to submit those. So I'll pass it back to Mr. Presswich.
Actually, I will take it from here. Cindy, if you can go to slide 13. So I will go through line item by line item, particularly looking at the discretionary items, knowing that there might be some adjustments on the non-discretionary items, such as the Measure T MOE. We feel pretty confident this will probably be closer to the $300,000 mark, which will be cash funded, where we can utilize some of the expenses we're already paying to go towards that MOE, unless the council does want to provide direction that they'd rather have the full 379 being cash funded going right over to street CIP. Is there any initial feedback on that first item?
And
my only comment is when there's an option to fund
Councilmember Hall.
Yes.
Excuse me, I had a question, and then I'll jump back to you. We'll be getting the paving plan fairly soon. Is that correct, Mr. City Manager?
Yes, at your next council meeting on the 25th, we'll be presenting the update to the 5-year street paving plan and talking to you about summer 2021 paving projects in approximately about $1 million of work.
Okay, thank you. And so now I see Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, and sorry about that. I've got a slow internet connection here today. Dr. Mitz, for the first item, your question, I don't have an immediate response to it. I think we need to figure out what is the full list, and then go through it and see how do we fund it. If we can't fund it through revenue, then we need to look at making room in our budget elsewhere to fund the things that we think are priorities. And it might be that's where the answer to your questions for that one item comes from anyway. In other words, I'd rather get the list of everything that we think is a priority expense consolidated, so we know here's our core list, and then how do we fund it?
It also may be helpful to know our pre-COVID numbers annually on, the Measure T augments our revenue by about $1 million, 900,000 plus pre-COVID. In addition, plus this $379,000 There is also SB1 and gas tax money. Those numbers are very low in context to the Measure T. It's such a terrific investment and local revenue from our local taxpayers that help go to our street. Also, our visitors fund that through the sales tax. But this would be really a question of approximately $60,000 in the context of $1 to $1.2 million is what we would essentially receive this year. So we would be able to take a little pressure off of the general fund imbalance by charging an existing street sweeper, as we intended to do last year, and ran into some interpretation issues with NBTA. This would be a question of is our council members comfortable with the idea that we reduce this by about $60,000?
Yes.
If we were looking for ways to
Yes.
close the gap.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that gives us a good direction to know that you have some flexibility there. I think everyone's preference is we leave it to projects if we can, but if we're trying to balance, this is one strategy that helps close that gap.
And our streets looking clean, that's great. That's a great benefit to our city.
Yep.
Thank you. Yep, supportive of that as well.
Thank you. The next item is the normal cost of step increases. So this is a non-discretionary item. It's part of each of the individual either bargaining groups and or unrepresented groups. This does not take into account because we did last year when we worked with all the different groups for the 1-year concessions. We also got into 2-year agreements with all the groups. So this does not include any regular CPI increases because that was not included in the 2-year agreement. This is just the normal non-discretionary as part of the agreement. The next item is the Napa Valley College lease. We're making the assumption that council wants to move forward with this and just want the validation of that with a nodding of heads and thumbs up.
I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring with a question.
With respect to the Napa Valley College lease and the tenant improvements and the cost of relocation, is it possible for us to look into the use of some of our impact fees for parts of those costs? Any other fees other than the general fund? It seems to me, especially the tenant improvements. Now, to me, that's a capital cost, and there's got to be a way. I know we're limited in the uses, but it's an extraordinary cost. The tenant improvements is just striking to me. The lease I can live with, but maybe something there to look at.
And I can actually respond to that. We did check with Wilden, who's doing our impact fee study, and unfortunately, it is not allowable cost because the city, while we're making the improvements, the city doesn't own the asset, so we are unable to use the impact fees for that.
Well, I'm not going to give up on that yet. I'll do my own research. Thanks.
I will also mention that with respect to the tenant improvements that we're working on now in space planning, we're value engineering this. We're trying to limit the number of walls that we would add to the building, and in the admin space, which represents about 60% of the space and 40% of the costs, each office we build is approximately $20,000. There's also markup and contingencies that are part of this cost estimate. And right now, the total estimate is about $500,000. Add on to that some contingencies, the cost associated with probably a few utility improvements that are more unknown at the moment, and then the physical moving costs of moving into the building. So with respect to the police portion of the building, 40% of the space, 60% of the cost, there's a few more classrooms that are more of a shell that we would build offices, one interview room. And so we're talking about about four offices on the admin side, about 4 to 5 on the police side too. So not too many touches on the building, and an additional wall for a communal break room for the entire building. So that's a bit of a sketch of what that looks like today. And this $216,000 number will adjust based on the timing of when the city and the college would enter into the lease. So that can come down a little bit. But today we have pre-funded $400,000 of the tenant improvements and any relocation costs. We're forecasting that we're going to need additional dollars to complete that. This estimate just came in on Friday, really after we'd already finished the work on this report. So a couple of the updates you see here today are just late breaking news, and this is one of those. But with respect to the cost, I think we can take that 216 down a little bit for this year. It will go back up to 216 in the following year on a full scale, assuming everyone's in the building by that time.
Thank you. I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau with a hand.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to make a quick comment. I appreciate being careful with our money. And I just remember how huge those numbers were when we got back for what it would cost to build a new city hall. And I don't believe we were also looking at police. And this is going to get us both the new police space and all of our city hall together. And I'm sitting right now in our Railroad City Hall building, and I know it just has not been adequate at all for our employees. And I'm just so excited that we're going to have a really good, healthy workspace after everybody's been working so hard. So I know it's expensive, and I just want to remind everybody what the true building costs are. And that's just lately has been through the roof, just even with plywood costs. And so even though this seems expensive, I really think we're getting the best deal we possibly can to be able to house all of our employees and then also now police in a really good, beautiful spot.
Thank you. And I support that as well. I do, of course, always look at expenses as well. And I know that we'll do our best to, as you say, value engineer as we go forward. But I think this is a huge step forward, and we want to have our staff feel like they're valued and working in a space that is comfortable and safe and serves them well. So supportive as well as we look at how we do this. And
the comments that are just made leave it to me to say, I'm not arguing that we don't move to the college. In fact, I am fully supportive of it, but I am suggesting that we drill down on all the numbers and look at all the different strategies that we have. And I agree with you. There is going to be a long-term benefit when we free up some of these other properties. First of all, we're going to improve staff morale highly. I know that. Every single person I've talked to said that is a good move, is highly supported. But then you have these other properties that are available down the road to do what the community thinks is appropriate to meet its vision. So I am fully supportive of the move. Just want to make sure everyone understands that.
And I want to throw in that Vice Mayor Doring had a tremendous amount to do with making this possible. So I just want to recognize that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So it seems we have consensus on that item. The next item is continuing to fund the PERS unfunded liability in the 15-year clip. Again, it is discretionary, but a few years ago, council did make the determination and actually passed a resolution supporting this, and just want to concur that this is still the wishes of the city council.
Yes.
I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy with a hand.
Yes, my answer would be no. I think this is one we can and should defer this year.
Any other thoughts from council on this? I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Well, my yes is that I'm remembering from the lengthy presentations that we had that we're doing this because it saves us money, and a significant amount of money. So I would need to, I don't have those numbers at the tip of my mind right now, but that's why mine was a yes. I would need a reminder on that.
Perhaps, Mr. Hardy, if there's a way to provide sort of the argument or the reasoning behind where you'd like to see this go, we can consider. I do know that as we consider this, we tried to find a middle path of balance, but if you're saying that perhaps we need to rethink, what is your thought in terms of putting that information forward?
Well, I don't have the ability myself to run the present value calculations, but what I do see, overall in the course of this discussion is that on the expenditure side, if anything, overall, we're adding, or at least calling out things that suggest a strong interest in adding to our expenses. And we're not even going to come close to a balanced budget if we don't find ways either to fairly significantly increase revenue, and a lot of that really, I think, isn't sort of whether we find additional revenue or not, but rather whether it comes our way, which is very different. So we have to find things on the expense side where we can make a decrease. And I'm keenly aware of the often hidden or not so hidden costs of deferring expenses, but deferring expenses is exactly what we do in a budget crisis. We're doing it. We have been doing it. We're deferring all kinds of costs, and even so, for example, I'll refer back to our previous discussion of $1 million in unfunded infrastructure improvements. Those deferrals come with cost. But even with that $1 million deferred, we're in round numbers $1 million away from a balanced budget. So I'm open to any and all ideas about how we plug the gap. But when I look through this list here, the first thing I see where deferral looks like it makes some sense is with this PERS unfunded liability. Thank you.
Thank you. And so perhaps that gives us the idea that we keep the conversation open as we move forward on where, just so we know if we have to go in, we've got an open door to have that discussion. Vice Mayor Doring?
I think, instinctually, I think that would be something to look at, but the prior city council spent an inordinate amount of time on this issue and created a policy and met several times and had the expert tell us that this was the best compromise that we can make. I am not really inclined to eliminate this payment at this point. It just, I was convinced after listening to our experts that this is completely appropriate. But I agree with you, we're in an emergency and we definitely need to cut costs in many different areas, no doubt about it. And I also agree with you that, deferral does have an impact in many other areas besides this one.
Thank you.
And so as we're seeing that we'll know more as we get through our May and get those numbers back on the TOT, that may inform where we need to cut, how deep we need to go. And as Vice Mayor Doring said, we did spend quite a bit of time on this issue with these sort of balances and really felt we came up with a good middle path. But if we wait and see where we end up with these May numbers and knowing we may have to dig deep, keeping the door conversation alive on that, I'm supportive of wherever we need to maybe go.
Okay, thank you. I do feel like we have some direction on this, that this one is not completely off the table, but just in case that it's something that we can bring back to council. The next item is the Assistant Public Works Director position.
And our assumption is that we will proceed with hiring and open this position for recruitment. We're anticipating having the opportunity to bring a new director on, and probably the next 2 months, sometime, hopefully sooner than 2 months. But this would be an opportunity for that director to also weigh in on the selection of the candidate. And this would obviously augment our focus on our ability to remove a little bit of a bottleneck on development review, and also enhance focus on the significant number of capital projects that are on our desks.
And one of the things that ties in, and we've learned certainly over the last year, is the critical part that Public Works plays in our community protection in terms of wildfire, emergency services, et cetera. So I think there's in my opinion, a value of seeing what we can do to keep staffed in that department in an adequate way.
Okay, so is there consensus on, oh, I see Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I was just going to say I'm wholeheartedly in favor of adding additional public works management talent to the organization. You know, we've got whatever it is, $80 to $100 million worth of projects to do. It's a huge amount of work. And we probably need more than just this one additional position. I mean, much of our challenge as a council is all about project execution and getting things done. And I think as a community, we've talked a lot about our needs. We spent a lot of money on a lot of assessments about those needs. We have plenty of reports that tell us we are way out of the ballpark in terms of completing the work that we need done that is long overdue. So I'm fully in support of this and think it should stay here. We should continue to look at investing more in this space.
And it is important to note that this is an approved position. The city was getting ready to actually recruit for the position when we received the resignation of our former public works director. So based on that, we put the recruitment on hold until we actually were able to hire a new public works director, so they could have some say in who's hired for this position, since it is a direct staff member of them. So it is important to note that this is currently an approved position from the city council. So I feel like we're hearing consensus that yes, keep this one. Okay. The next is health insurance increases. We really can't do anything about that, so I'll just move right on to the next one. The business recovery marketing. So this is investing an additional $100,000, and we'd like the feedback on if we think that's an appropriate amount, if that's something that we start lower than that and then maybe work our way up to it. So I'd love the feedback on that as well.
Mark, do you want to give us a little context in terms of the strategy here? And then I see Councilmember Hardy, would you like to ask a question first, or I just wanted to see if Mr. Prestwich had a little context?
I'm happy to provide context or postpone until the question.
Well, I'll go ahead and ask the question. And this is for Dr. Mitz, I think. What out of the local sales tax, what comes to the city? What percentage of the sales tax generated by local sales actually goes to the city of St. Helena? That's my question.
We get the half-cent sales tax from Measure D, and offhand, I can't remember the exact percent of the total percentage that's collected. Mark or Mandy?
I can answer that.
Thank you.
There's a 1% base when we pay our sales tax at retail transactions at restaurants. You know, depending on the county and the city you're in, it may hover between 8 and 10%. Cities only receive generally 1% of that. That's called the Bradley Burns portion. Our local voters have enacted a permanent half-cent add-on tax, essentially. So we receive 1.5% of local tax revenues directly to the general fund. In addition to that, the half-cent regional countywide Measure T tax we obviously receive per formula some revenue from that. We're a bit of a donor city in the context of Measure T. It doesn't produce the same revenue that the same exact increment of tax produces for Measure T. So it comes in about 900, north of 900 on a pre-COVID budget versus about $1.5 million for a typical year for us on the half-cent sales tax.
But on the sales themselves, setting aside the Measure T, we're collecting about 1.5 cents on each dollar of sale, as opposed to 1.5% of the tax collected. Okay, that goes to my comment here. What that says to me is that in order to realize a net gain in revenue to the city, each dollar invested in marketing needs to generate close to $100 in additional sales. If we think about it just in terms of sales tax, and I know that we have revenues generated in different ways by different businesses, so that's not as a grossly oversimplified way of thinking about it. Nevertheless, I'm pretty sure. Well, let's see if I can do the math here. If I try to do it in my head, I'll get it wrong. So I'm going to quickly go to the calculator. Yeah, the $100,000 invested in marketing would have to generate, if we're thinking about it purely in terms of a net gain from sales tax revenue, which assumes that that was the only way in which the marketing increased revenues to the city. We would need well over $5 million in additional sales to actually generate a net gain in terms of sales tax revenue. So it just, for me, the question becomes, does this investment pay? And it's not, there may be other reasons to make it, but in terms of our financial picture and our budget, it's not at all clear to me that it pays.
I'd like to just help provide some additional context. The focus is on the business recovery marketing. Last year, the council invested $50,000. We partnered with Calistoga and Yountville to launch when it was appropriate, coming out of COVID, and with the second couple of the two waves, there were different timing. So there was different timing associated when the marketing was deployed, but the real focus is on a hotel tax, not sales tax. Sales tax is a derivative of the idea of bringing more people in the context of hotel tax. We receive 12% of every transaction. So if we can grow the number of people, and our upside in all of our revenue forecasting, our upside is on the hotel front. So we know our current estimate is $1.2 million today, short of our performance in 18-19. So if we can close that gap, our hope is that this business recovery marketing not only helps close the gap, and now there are newer analytical tools that can help us understand and help the chamber, who we would partner with, understand how that investment translates to actual dollars that are received by our hotels. And obviously the local business community also wins when those visitors also visit downtown shops. We do have Amy Caraba, the president and CEO of the St. Helena Chamber, on the call today, and she can provide additional details about how she would recommend investing this. I also have the same details and can share those with you. And the vision really is to provide $25,000 per quarter. There's some video content that approximately $7,500 of video content that this would fund to freshen that up. And then about 80,000 of that 100 is direct to ads and marketing. And there's approximately $12,000 in the development of those ads that would be funded.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate the reminder that this is oriented towards increasing the number of visitors who stay overnight in our local inns and hotels. But it does seem to me that one of the challenges just in evaluating the benefits of this kind of investment is that at least as I sit here thinking about it, I don't see any obvious way to test it. So in other words, we don't have the ability to sort of experience this year in two parallel universes, one with the investment made and one without, so that we can see what the difference is. It's a hard thing to measure, but that's really just my clumsy way of saying it would help me to understand how the expenditures are focused in ways that we have some reason to think generate the results we're looking for.
Is it of value for Amy Caraba from the chamber to either jump on now and give a little background on how this is measured, or for her to prepare something for us, something brief that can help answer some of those questions? And
I think we can jump on now if you'd like.
Okay, that would be great. And then Councilmember Chateau, would you like to, is your question pertinent to this, or should I circle back to you?
It is. It was the same thing. Let's ask Amy about how she could measure from last year when we spent the money, because she does have a lot of metrics that she speaks about, as well as I'm interested in how this money is spent, specifically on bringing people to come visit and stay in St. Helena hotels, because we know it's gotten more and more competitive for where people go and stay when they're visiting the wine country. And so we both work with the neighboring communities, and we also, I know, work at distinguishing what makes St. Helena unique. And I would like to hear from Amy about more of that, please.
Great. Okay, very good. If Amy could jump on, that would be terrific.
I believe our city clerk is helping to make that happen.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so happy to answer these questions. I actually sent all of council a report about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks ago. I'm not sure if you all read that, but all the metrics are there. We track everything. And I think the biggest thing to really put in perspective is in terms of destinations and tourism, in terms of marketing, having additional dollars coming out of a pandemic or coming out of fires really is a necessity for bringing people here, generating revenue for the city, filling up our hotel rooms. And I can't stress this enough. St. Helena, out of the cities, all 5 of them in Napa Valley, we are tremendously, and I say this with respect, but we are tremendously underfunded than the other towns. And so they're able to do a lot more. And we really stretch our dollars. We put a lot of our chamber dollars towards marketing because we understand in terms of business growth and business support, we need people here. So marketing is my #1 priority. And if you look at the metrics that I sent in the email, you can also go to sthelena.com. I have all my reporting numbers up for the public to view year round, and I update it quarterly. So everything that I get from the Abbey agency in terms of our ads, in terms of our web traffic, in terms of our influencer performance metrics, our reach, our impressions. It is all there and able to view, and it shows you exactly what those dollars are doing and why it is so important. This $100,000 for this business recovery marketing plan, we built out a very strong, very robust strategic marketing plan for the next fiscal year that I feel is just vital for the recovery efforts of St. Helena. And what's great about the plan is we built it out in phases. We built it out quarterly to basically see how these ads are performing. I met with the Abby agency yesterday. I got a preview of the ads that we're currently going to be launching right now on our current plan. And they're creative, they're stunning, they're going to create a lot of buzz. We have them targeted, very specific demographics, specifically in drive markets. The current ads that we're running right now for the Up Valley campaign are performing incredibly well. In fact, web traffic and bookings is up 155%. And all, as I mentioned, all of that was sent to you guys, and it's all up on our website. And the plan for this $100,000 is basically to do a number of things. It's to create a campaign, which, as I mentioned, I got a sneak peek yesterday of what that could look like in the new fiscal year. And then having these ads target, like I mentioned, it's specific demographics, but what we want to do is we want to partner with either Travelocity or TripAdvisor and track hotel bookings. There is a way to do that and report those numbers out, show you how the ads are performing, what it's leading to in terms of revenue for the city. Also using ads on Google as well as either Facebook or Instagram, depending on how well the current ads are performing. We would obviously adjust this campaign as we see those metrics coming in. But that is really the goal. We are also doing a rebrand in this plan. And a rebrand is giving St. Helena just a little bit of a refresh in terms of the destination marketing logo, the brand as a whole. It's a new color palette. It's a brand. Most cities do this every 5 to 8 years. St. Helena has not had a rebrand in about 15 years. So this is very important in terms of marketing, and putting this plan in place, as I mentioned, I think is just vital to revitalize the image and really create buzz for St. Helena. We're already implementing it. We had an influencer that we brought out and did a paid marketing plan about 2 weeks ago. One of the ads generated over 60,000 views in less than 24 hours. So we're getting out there, we're getting in front of eyes, and it's only here on up for the future. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate your being on. And do we have any council questions at this point? And certainly we'll all refresh ourselves with the report that you had sent out. Seeing no council comments at this point, we'll then move
think
forward.
Eric
And then
giving his hand.
Councilmember
Thank you.
Hall.
Sorry, my electronic hand raiser doesn't work today. Thank you, Amy. Just going back to Councilmember Hardy's comments about what do we get for this. It's always a difficult thing to quantify return on marketing investment. But if you look at Amy's latest report, it's pretty tremendous, the amount of attention that she's getting. And when I look at our community survey, where the number one business issue this coming year is business recovery of our city, and that's also probably one of the best ways we're going to generate additional funding. $100,000 here, or we can look at staging it or phasing it over time. But I think it's important that we get our downtown core full and functioning again. We've got 40,000 square feet there that's non-performing today. The rents on that will require 25 million in additional sales. That equates to, between just additional sales tax and some additional overnight stays, that's almost $1 million in additional revenue to the city. It's almost like having another hotel without having to go through all the yelling and screaming about getting a hotel built in town. So I think it's well worth the investment. I think the council, it's our responsibility and expectation, I guess, that we work closely with Amy. We set clear objectives for the work that she's doing. She's got great coordination going today with the rest of the county. And I think the more of that, the better. I think we can attract tourists here, but I just wonder if those dollars are best spent if we're not also getting our downtown built out again. So I'd like to see both of those things happen. And I think having sort of a two-pronged approach, destination marketing combined with business recovery specific messaging, I think is very important for us. Those are my comments.
Thank you. So on this issue, I feel there's support in terms of going forward. And if there are any further questions in looking back at that report, then as we move forward, we can ask those. But Mr. Prestwich, Director Mitz, are we feeling comfortable with what you're getting from the council here on this?
Yes, I am. Thank you. And again, it's just a reminder that this is not the final end all be all. We know that as we see the better revenue trends, we might need to make decisions later, but at least we have a clear understanding on this. I feel like we've already covered the higher cadet to full-time officer with the public safety. I'm seeing nods of heads, so unless there's any other conversation on that one. Okay. If we can, Jeff?
No, I'm just saying yes.
Oh,
got to be a
perfect.
nod.
So the next slide. And again, we'll probably just take this slide categorically, if that's okay, if there's any specific questions. Knowing I feel like we've already kind of addressed the incremental increases for the fire department, knowing half of it we cannot do anything about, the other half is Sunday coverage. But I feel like we've exhausted that. The attorney, as well as the class 1 trails are non-items. So for the others, the interpretation services, restoration of 50% of the training budgets, the downtown street lighting, diversity and inclusion, and then also the nonprofit program, taking into consideration the other comments that were made earlier. Categorically as a whole, just wanted to receive some feedback on these items as well.
Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you. I was just going to raise my hand the other way. So I was interested when I saw that 60,000 for the interpretation services on getting some metrics, which I know we don't have yet, but just how many people are using it. I know language equity is super important. So I just want to stay open to if there are ways in the future, once we know that number, if we can, let's say, like provide it, say that if somebody tells us they're going to come, that we could provide the translation for them. It's just a very big number if nobody's using it. So I wanted to be able to understand that better and make sure that we're flexible and nimble, and of course, have it so that people do not participate because of language, but still look at that cost and see what we can do, and don't just spend it every year if people aren't showing up in that way. I think we have to be open to see how people do receive information and participate, and we don't know that yet.
Thank you. We're going to have to, I don't mean to cut you off. We're going to have to think about time. We're going to have to try to finish up by noon and open it for public comments. But Councilmember Chateau, I want to make sure that Director Mitz has noted your comments on the language and the metrics.
I have, thank you. And I will work with both our city clerk as well as assistant to the city manager, because I know they work closely with the translation services and the interpretation services. So I will see if we can find some metrics out.
Thank you. And then I just want a clarifying question on the 50% of training budgets. That's training for our staff, for programs, for their edification, et cetera, as they work for the city.
Correct. It is professional development, and it is 50% of the non-essential training. So we keep the essential training for certifications, and this is just non-essential.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Just a question on the litigation budget. What is the total litigation budget, and why 75,000? Was that a recommendation from our attorney? I assume that's an increase over the existing budget, but I want to know what the total budget is. And I'm inclined to, unfortunately, state that $75,000 doesn't seem like it's going to do the job, knowing how litigation, and we're in a few major ones right now. So someone could talk me through that one.
Yes. I will have Mandy will be looking up the information for the total litigation costs, and you are correct. It is a $75,000 increase from the current year budget, and it was based on our attorney's recommendation. Mandy, do you have the full litigation budget?
Yes, the full litigation budget is $150,000 from general fund.
Okay, well, I'm inclined to think that that's probably a little low, and I'm also wondering what kind of a message we send to the world when we have that kind of a budget, when we have some significant litigation that we're in right now. So that's all I have to add on that.
Vice Mayor Doring, in terms of perhaps a process of re-looking at this, working with the city attorney and you with the background, as well as Councilmember Hardy, do you have an idea of how we might look at numbers that might better reflect where we're at?
Well, I'll have a conversation with the city attorney. We have to cut where we can. I'm just projecting some significant expenses. $75,000, you can burn through $75,000 in a month, depending on what the case is. So I'll have a conversation with him, and maybe I'll have a conversation with Lester. We can talk through that one.
Thank you. Okay, and I think, if we're looking okay on this slide, I think we have one more slide we need to get to, and then I'll open it for public comment.
Correct. So Cindy, if we can go to the next slide. So here are the current unfunded items. I know we have received some feedback, especially for civic improvements maintenance, about potentially in just doing the $500,000, also including an additional $500,000. The HMGP match, Defensible Space, I feel like we've had unanimous support in providing these match funds for that. The tenant improvement relocation, we have talked about that as well. And I feel like that is something that we have support for moving forward with those, knowing that we will see if there's any other offsetting things to get those costs down, or if there's any other funding available for us to use. I think the last two items, the pre-funding sick leave conversion liability, again, as mentioned before, that's probably on the lower priority, knowing that some of our liability has been reduced. And I as well as the city manager, feel comfortable not leaving that off the table for this upcoming current year. And then the other is the CARES funding. It is a fairly minor dollar amount, but it would also allow approximately another 10 families or 10 households to be able to participate in this program, which we have seen an increase in the last year due to COVID. So just some overall ideas for that, or if there's any other ideas that are currently unfunded that the City Council would like us to consider. We also know we have the availability, since our numbers are very preliminary at this point with the revenue expenses. Once we close our fiscal year books and we have more of an idea where our net position is, I know at least Councilmember Chateau and I believe one other council member was comfortable in taking our reserves potentially below that 30% level. We did this a couple of years ago when we were in a better financial position. We had what we called the add back list. So as we knew where revenues actually ended, or we got those one-time revenue boosts such as ERAF, where we actually had a list, and this might be something where we can utilize that add back list is as we know where we ended in the current fiscal year, how much reserves we're willing to dip into, whether it's taking it down to 30% or maybe even a little bit lower, that those are some things that we can use this unfunded list for. So I'd love feedback on that as well.
Thank you. Any council comment, feedback at this point? One of the, we received a letter from the Up Valley Family Centers talking sort of a recommendation on a St. Helena Community Response Fund. And I know that we have an ongoing dialogue with Up Valley Family Center. So perhaps we can look at how something like that might actually get started, even if there's not a tremendous amount of funding to get it going, at least get a system in place. There may be a way to have that conversation. I just wanted to recognize that letter that came in. So with that, if there are no other council comments at this point, and seeing none, I will open it to public comment and see if we have any public comment on where we are.
I do see a hand raised. Just one moment. Nancy, you are unmuted. You can address the council. You have 4 minutes.
Good morning, everybody. This is fascinating. I just had an idea which might be completely off the wall, but rather than paying out that money for a PR campaign, maybe you could consider launching a citizen-driven marketing campaign and make it like a competition. There's so many people on social media, and it's far-reaching. So everybody I know loves St. Helena and could probably reach out and give a lot of good reasons why people should be coming and lodging and dining and everything else. So it's just a thought. Thank you for the good work you guys are doing. Bye.
Thank you for the public comment. Any additional public comment?
There are no other hands raised.
Thank you. So seeing none, we'll bring it back to the council. Are there any council comments at this point? And I will, I'm seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if I'm understanding where we are, we had an imbalance already in our budget estimate, and we've added, I don't know, maybe another million or $1.2 million to that imbalance. I don't know where that's going to come in terms of revenue, but certainly I think that needs to be the focus going forward. And we may have to look at reducing additional expenses in other areas of the city that we're not talking about here today. That's all I would add to the conversation here.
Thank you. And I concur. I think we've got to keep the conversation open at every angle to see where we may need to save. So I saw Councilmember Chateau and then Vice Mayor Doring.
Yes, I continue to feel hopeful about the hotel TOT coming back up. We know that there's a lot of potential there, especially with Aaliyah, Napa Valley, if I'm saying that name right. They weren't online, they are now. That's really significant for us. And I would like to see those numbers at the end of this month or the beginning of next month, because I really think that that can make a difference for us.
Thank you. And then we have the Vice Mayor and then Councilmember Hardy.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just want to echo the comments that were made at the outset by our city manager. You know, we get focused on numbers and we lose focus on our organization. I just want to thank our staff for the sacrifices that have been made over the last couple of years now. I don't want to let that go unmentioned. There's just been a tremendous sacrifice and a really not only a financial burden, but a mental well-being burden. And I just want to let you know, for what it's worth, I at least, and I think this council feels the same way, we have your back. We don't want you to feel like you're being ignored in this conversation. Where we can help, we will help. We're all in this together, and I just want to let you know that I'm extremely grateful as a citizen, as a resident of St. Helena, but also as a council member. So I just want to make sure that those comments are out there so you fully understand at least where this council member is coming from. And I do think our council feels the same way. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you, Mayor Ellsworth. Like Vice Mayor Doring, I'm wanting to come back to the big picture here. I think it's in the nature of the process that it requires us to drill down on particular details and give them focused attention. But I'm really asking the questions I ask and making the comments I make because it is the larger picture that I'm thinking about all the time. And I'm grateful to Vice Mayor Doring for emphasizing all that staff has done and sacrificed. I'm quite certain that running our municipal operations shorthanded puts a great stress and strain on everyone involved. And it happens in a variety of ways, one of which is that I'm quite sure, generates more friction and complaints from the citizens or customers that the city serves, which is an additional strain on staff. So I agree that should not go unremarked. And we're fortunate to have the staff we have. And my own perception has been that the city has been fundamentally understaffed for most, if not all, of the last decade. So we have a real catch-up challenge, and there's no good way to address that during a period of revenue shortfall. So we're trying to do something now truly challenging. We're trying to get ahead while treading water. And I have a lot of confidence that all the thought and attention that's gone in to this presentation today and the materials and information that have come before the council are heading us in exactly that direction, where we can both tread water and get ahead. But I don't think there's anything easy about that. So I, for one, just want to keep my sleeves rolled up and continue to engage with all of you in that enterprise. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a few comments. Are there any other council comments? So I'll echo the Vice Mayor and Councilmember Hardy in recognizing staff. For me, what I know I saw was folks were on staff working 3 to 4 times as hard as normally through these challenges. It's just remarkable, the stamina to go from one situation to another, one emergency to another, and then now having to shift into a real focus on our water situation. It's remarkable work, and keeping our eyes on the big picture. I think we've been doing a tremendous job. A tool we have, I want to recognize, is our tie-in with the League of California Cities, which can help us sort of benchmark and understand our context related to other cities as well. We're not in a bubble. We're in a community of cities. We're in a state. We're in a country, and understanding where we are in terms of context is important. That League of Cities is a good tool for us to understand where we are, and that helps give us information about where we need to improve, and then also where we recognize we're doing a remarkable job. And so I do want to make sure that our staff, in my opinion, has done just a remarkable job through a remarkable year of challenges. And so I just want to echo that, and working through this budget and looking at how we're going to move forward, getting everybody's input. The council's been tremendous in looking at the detail and how we synchronize and synergize moving forward. So with that, I'll hand it back to the city manager and see if that gives you adequate direction for moving forward from this meeting.
Yes, and I really appreciate all of those comments very much. I also want to just recap by saying round of thanks to all of our staff. All of our department directors participated in this process as well, and meeting with our finance department staff and building this budget to get the preliminary budget. The feedback has been very helpful. We know we have a lot more work to do. The story is still unfolding. Special thanks to Priya for her work on the budget survey, Mayor Ellsworth and Vice Mayor Doring for their work in helping with the development of that survey. April Mitz and Mandy Kellogg and your team. So much work went into just prepping for today and the work throughout from inception, the beginning of this year. So thanks everyone for your work. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And yes, shout out to our assistant to the city manager for that excellent presentation earlier in the meeting on the feedback from the community. So with that, well, I'll thank everybody. Let's keep focused on fire preparedness, on water conservation, and on our recovery steps as we move forward from the COVID situation. We'll keep stepping forward optimistically into the future, and we'll see you all at the next meeting.